couldn't trade him through the regular season because y'all got to trade a deuce. And in Milwaukee, he had a third brother on the team. Y'all got to trade 3 people. That's tough.
One trade, 2 brothers cut, and a franchise finally free from years of family politics. Within 24 hours of trading 2-time MVP Giannis Antetokounmpo to the Miami Heat, the Milwaukee Bucks completely cut his brothers from the organization. Not gradually, not quietly. Within a single day, Giannis Antetokounmpo, 6 seasons in Milwaukee, 6 seasons holding a roster spot that many inside the organization quietly questioned, gone. Alex Antetokounmpo, signed just months earlier to make history as the 3rd brother on the same NBA roster, gone. Waived, cut loose. Left to find their own way the moment the leverage that had protected them disappeared. And if you have been watching what was actually happening inside that organization for the past several years, none of this should surprise you because what just played out in Milwaukee was not just a roster move. It was the ending of something that had been building behind the scenes for a long time. The coaches knew it, the front office knew it, and the moment Giannis got on a plane to Miami, everyone finally said out loud what they had been whispering for years. The Bucks did not just trade their superstar. They used it as a moment to reclaim control of their own roster. Let's break down exactly how we got here. To understand why the departures of Giannis and Alex hit the way they did, you have to understand who Giannis Antetokounmpo actually is and what he means, not just to basketball, but to his family. Giannis was born in Athens, Greece to Nigerian immigrants Charles and Veronica, who had moved to Europe in search of a better life and found hardship instead. The family spent years stateless without Greek citizenship, with Giannis and his brothers selling trinkets and watches on the streets of Athens just to help the family survive. Basketball became the escape. For Giannis, it eventually became something much larger than that. It became a vehicle through which he intended to rescue everyone he loved. The Milwaukee Bucks selected him with the 15th overall pick in the 2013 NBA draft. He was raw, unpolished, barely 200 pounds, and had almost no meaningful professional experience. Most franchises passed on him. Milwaukee gambled, and that gamble produced one of the greatest development arcs in the history of the sport. By the 2018-19 season, Giannis had become a legitimate force unlike anything the league has seen in years. A 6 feet 11 inches point forward who could initiate offense, switch onto every position defensively, and impose his physicality on every possession of every game. He won his first MVP award that season, averaging 7 points, 5 rebounds, and 9 assists while leading Milwaukee to the best record in the NBA. He won it again the following year, 6 points, 7 rebounds, 8 assists, and added the Defensive Player of the Year award in 2019-20, becoming only the 3rd player in NBA history to win both in the same season, joining Michael Jordan and Hakeem Olajuwon. Then, in the summer of 2021, he delivered Milwaukee his first championship since 1971, averaging 2 points, 7 rebounds, and 0 assists against the Phoenix Suns in the finals, winning Finals MVP and cementing himself as the greatest player in franchise history. He signed a Supermax extension worth approximately $228 million. He was loyal. He was the franchise, and he had the kind of power inside that organization that came with all of it. That power extended to his family, and that is where the story gets complicated. Throughout his entire career, Giannis made one thing consistently clear in interviews, in press conferences, in everything he said publicly. Family was not a side note to his success. It was the whole reason for it. He spoke about the streets of Athens, about the years of uncertainty, about the guilt of making it to the NBA while his family was still struggling. He wanted his brothers to have opportunities. He wanted to give them what circumstances had almost permanently taken away. And in Milwaukee, with the kind of leverage that two-time MVP carries inside a franchise, he had the ability to make that happen. The question the Bucks never answered publicly, and the one that is now impossible to avoid, is how much that accommodation cost them as a basketball organization. Here is the part that most people understood, but nobody in Milwaukee's front office wanted to say out loud. Giannis Antetokounmpo spent 6 seasons with the Bucks. 6 seasons, and across all of that time, he averaged just 2.4 points per game. Not a down year. Not a slump. A career average of 2.4 points per game across 6 full seasons on one of the most prominent rosters in the Eastern Conference. His minutes were limited, his offensive contributions were minimal, and a statistical argument for his roster spot essentially did not exist. What his abacus always cited instead were the intangibles. The energy, the defensive intensity in practice, the locker room presence, and above all, the impact he had on Giannis personally. Those things were real. Teammates consistently praised him. He was well liked. He celebrated the 2021 championship on that court alongside his brother in a moment that was genuinely moving. But here's the problem. The NBA does not hand out guaranteed roster spots for intangibles. A standard NBA roster carries 15 players. Every spot from the 12th man through the 15th represents a real decision about competitive value. Who gives a championship contending team the best marginal chance when things go wrong late in a playoff game? Veteran minimum contracts range from roughly $1 million to nearly $3 million annually, depending on years of service. The financial cost was manageable. The opportunity cost, the developing young players, the shooters, the defenders, the players who could have occupied that spot and contributed something measurable accumulated across multiple seasons and multiple playoff runs that never ended the way Milwaukee needed them to. Think about what that actually means across 6 seasons. 6 years of roster decisions where a spot that could have gone to a three-point specialist, a switchable defender, or developmental prospect was instead occupied by a player averaging 2.4 points per game. 6 years of front office executives making roster decisions with one eye on basketball, on what it would mean to move on from the franchise player's brother. The Bucks made first-round exits. They lost in the Eastern Conference Finals. They had stretches where the supporting cast around Giannis was clearly insufficient and fans and analysts pointed directly at roster construction as one of the contributing factors. Whether Giannis specifically was the variable that tipped those series is impossible to prove. What is not impossible to see is that the organizational culture of accommodation extended beyond any one roster spot and shaped how Milwaukee approached personnel decisions at the margins for years. Doc Rivers, who took over as head coach during that turbulent stretch, was reportedly among those inside the organization who grew frustrated with the arrangement. Sources close to the situation described internal friction over the sense that the organization was bowing too completely to its star, that ownership was prioritizing a relationship with Giannis over the kind of roster construction decisions that give a team its best chance to compete. Coaches openly questioned whether keeping 2 active effectively reserve family members was compatible with actually building a championship-caliber roster around a generational talent who deserved better supporting infrastructure. Rivers was not the first coach to navigate this dynamic. His predecessor, Adrian Griffin, had been hired ahead of the 2023-24 season and was fired before reaching the midpoint of that year, one of the more jarring coaching dismissals in recent league memory. The instability at the coaching level that period reflected a broader organizational dysfunction that went well beyond any single roster decision. Mike Budenholzer had coached the 2021 championship team and departed after that run. The coaches who followed inherited not just a roster that was aging around the superstar, but an organizational culture in which the boundaries of what could be challenged or changed were shaped by the relationship with Giannis. The family roster situation was one expression of that culture, and it never fundamentally changed regardless of who was standing on the sideline. That tension never became a public confrontation while Giannis was still there, but it was there and it built across multiple seasons and multiple coaching changes until the relationship itself collapsed entirely. Then came Alex. In April 2026, the Milwaukee Bucks signed Alex Antetokounmpo to a two-way contract, making him the third brother to suit up on the same NBA roster simultaneously. To do it, they waived a 3-year NBA veteran, a player with actual professional track record, to open a roster spot. Alex stood around 6'8" and played as a forward, having previously logged time professionally in Lithuania, Montenegro, and Greece before landing in Milwaukee. He was a well-traveled player by the time he arrived, but his professional accomplishments did not explain why an NBA team would cut a proven veteran to accommodate him. The context that explained it was his last name and the superstar who wore. The move immediately generated the kind of commentary the organization should have expected. 3 brothers on the same NBA roster simultaneously, one a 2-time MVP and champion when averaging 2.4 points per game across 6 seasons, and one making his NBA debut via midseason two-way signing that required waiving a more qualified player, was not a story about basketball evaluation. It was a story about family leverage at its most visible and its most direct. Reports indicated that the organization even allowed Giannis's personal skills coach to travel on a team plane. A concession that itself became a symbol of how far the Bucks were willing to go to keep their franchise player content. The front office made each of these decisions anyway, one after another across multiple seasons and multiple coaching changes. Because when Giannis Antetokounmpo wanted something in Milwaukee, the organization has spent years demonstrating that it would find a way to provide it. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because what happened next forced everything into the oak. The 2025-26 season was a disaster by every measurable standard. The Bucks finished 32-50, missed the playoffs entirely, and the internal environment deteriorated in ways that went well beyond the losing record. Giannis suffered injuries during the year, and as the season became unrecoverable, the front office made the decision to shut him down. A call that carried serious financial consequences for Giannis personally, costing him a significant contract bonus tied to games played or former stretch. He was furious, not privately frustrated. Furious. According to multiple reports, he went completely dark on the organization. He ghosted the front office entirely. He refused to answer calls from team executives. He would not allow team doctors to monitor his training or his recovery. The relationship between the franchise and the man, who had been his entire identity over a decade, had reached the point of complete breakdown, and everyone inside the league understood what that meant for what came next. It is worth pausing here to note just how dramatically the dynamic had shifted. This was the same player who had signed a $228 million supermax extension out of loyalty to Milwaukee when he could have left. The same player who had repeatedly spoken in public about his commitment to the city and the franchise. The same player whose personal skills coach was reportedly allowed to travel on the team plane. A concession that itself became symbolic of how far the organization had been to accommodate him. The relationship between Giannis and the Bucks had always involved an unusual degree of personal accommodation flowing in one direction. When that relationship finally broke, it broke completely. Knowing he would not sign an extension under any circumstances, knowing the era had ended, the Bucks pulled the trigger on the eve of the 2026 NBA draft. On June 22, 2026, they traded Giannis Antetokounmpo to the Miami Heat. The package Milwaukee received included a significant haul of young players and draft picks. The kind of return that signals a franchise accepting a full rebuild rather than trying to paper over what has happened. New head coach Taylor Jenkins was brought in to lead that rebuild from the ground up. The Giannis era was officially over. And within 24 hours, so was the Antetokounmpo family's time in Milwaukee. Giannis had his contract expire and was waived. However, you frame the mechanics, the result was the same. After 6 seasons and 2.4 points per game with the superstar leverage that has sustained his roster spot now in South Beach, there was no longer any organizational reason to keep him. The Miami Heat were mentioned as a possible free agency destination, though ESPN's Ramona Shelburne reported that it was not expected the Heat would be adding Giannis's brothers to their roster. Pat Riley does not hand out complimentary roster spots, as one source put it, and Miami made clear that acquiring Giannis did not mean inheriting his family employment situation. Alex's situation was even more straightforward. He had signed his 2-way contract in April. By late June, he was gone, waived by the organization and left without an NBA landing spot. He signed with Prometheus Patras, a professional club in Greece's top domestic basketball division. The same circuit where Antetokounmpo family's basketball story had its roots before Giannis changed everything. In a strange way, Alex's story completed a circle that started in Greece and, at least for now, returned there. The speed of those cuts was the story. Not eventually, not after some transitional period of reflection or evaluation. Within a single day of the trade being finalized, the organization that had been his roster construction to accommodate the Antetokounmpo family for multiple seasons, that had waived the 3-year veteran they signed Alex just 8 months earlier, that had allowed a personal skills coach on the team plane, that had absorbed years of internal friction from coaching staffs who questioned the arrangement, made both moves almost simultaneously once the leverage was gone. Under Taylor Jenkins and a front office now committed to rebuilding around young talent and the draft assets acquired in the Giannis trade, there was simply no argument remaining for keeping either brother. The levers that had protected those spots disappeared the moment the trade was agreed upon, and so did the spots themselves. Sports media covered the departures with the kind of pointed commentary that had been building for years. The Athletic, ESPN, and national NBA coverage addressed the optics directly. 2 roster spots held for years under circumstances that many observers considered driven by star accommodation, vacated within 24 hours of the star's departure. Ramona Shelburne of ESPN reported that it was not expected the Heat would be adding Giannis's brothers to their roster, putting formal language on what insiders had already been saying privately. Yahoo Sports noted that many fans around the NBA had felt strongly about the family arrangement for years, and saw the immediate cuts as confirmation of what they had always suspected. The Facebook post from a popular NBA commentary account, "Bucks waived all the remaining Antetokounmpo brothers," went viral almost immediately, the laughing reaction capturing exactly the sentiment that critics have been expressing across multiple seasons of quietly simmering frustration. Basket News reported specifically that the Heat would not be signing any additional Antetokounmpo brothers after acquiring Giannis, putting a formal end to speculation that the family accommodation might simply relocate from Milwaukee to Miami with the player. Pat Riley, as one source put it, does not hand out complimentary roster spots. The Miami Heat have a well-documented culture of organizational discipline and roster accountability under Riley's leadership. And the suggestion that they would absorb the family dynamics to help destabilize Milwaukee was quickly and firmly dismissed by insiders with knowledge of the Heat's thinking. Sports Illustrated had covered that Alex Antetokounmpo signing back in October 2025 under the headline, "Bucks cutting ties with 3-year veteran to sign Giannis' brother." A headline that captured the zero-sum nature of that roster decision as clearly as anything written about it. A player with 3 years of NBA service was waived to make room for a 2-way signing whose most notable qualification was his last name. That story did not generate much national attention at the time. In the context of what happened 8 months later, it became part of a narrative that had been writing itself for longer than most people realized. What makes this story emotionally complicated, and what gets lost when the conversation focuses entirely on roster politics, is that the love driving Giannis' decisions was genuine. This was not calculated. This was not a superstar manufacturing a narrative for public relations purposes. Giannis Antetokounmpo came from a family that sold goods on the streets of Athens to survive. He made it to the NBA against odds that most people cannot fully appreciate. And when he got there, he wanted to bring his brothers with him. He spoke publicly and repeatedly about the bond that had carried the family through poverty and displacement. He talked about guilt, about the weight of having made it while others who had been through everything with him were still fighting for opportunities. That impulse is human. It is understandable. In isolation, it is even admirable. The problem was that it played out inside a professional sports organization trying to compete at the highest level in one of the most competitive leagues on the planet. Every roster spot that went to a brother with a career average of 2.4 points per game was a spot that did not go to a player who might have pushed the Bucks further in the postseason. Every season that Alex occupied a two-way slot was a developmental opportunity that another prospect did not receive. The coaches who watched this play out, including Rivers, who was vocal about his frustrations, according to league sources, understood that superstar accommodation has limits, and that Milwaukee had exceeded those limits in ways that became increasingly difficult to justify on basketball grounds alone. The personal skills coach traveling on the team plane was one data point. The 6 seasons of Giannis was another. The mid-season Alex signing was the third and perhaps the most transparent of all. The broader NBA context matters here, too. Superstar influence over organizational decisions is not a Milwaukee invention. LeBron James documented input over roster construction across Cleveland, Miami, and Los Angeles is the most referenced example in modern basketball history. Kevin Durant's organizational influence in Brooklyn and Phoenix was reported extensively by credible outlets covering the league. Kawhi Leonard shaped coaching and medical staff decisions in both San Antonio and Toronto. Chris Paul's influence over personnel in Oklahoma City and Phoenix generated significant commentary from executives and scouts who spoke anonymously about how franchise players reshape organizations around their preferences. The difference in Milwaukee was the directness and the sustained visibility of the accommodation. Other forms of superstar influence involved preferred teammates with legitimate basketball credentials or coaching choices that at least carried a professional justification beyond the personal relationship. Placing family members on a roster and keeping them there for years, through multiple coaching regimes and multiple missed postseason opportunities, was a different category of accommodation entirely. Hundreds of players with comparable basketball profiles to Giannis Antetokounmpo have never received a single guaranteed NBA roster day. Some of them spent those exact seasons grinding through G League contracts and 10-day deals hoping for a call that never came. The question of what those players deserved, the ones who lacked the leverage of a famous last name, rarely gets raised at volume because the league prefers to manage superstar relationships quietly and avoid the uncomfortable conversation underneath them. Milwaukee managed to stay as publicly for years until the relationship collapsed and the management was no longer necessary or possible. Now the Bucks begin again. Taylor Jenkins inherits a roster with genuine cap flexibility, a significant collection of draft assets from the Giannis trade, and no more family entanglements complicating personnel decisions at the margins. The organizational philosophy under Jenkins will be built around player development, youth, and the kind of merit-based roster construction that the Giannis era made consistently difficult. Whether the years of accommodation materially cost Milwaukee postseason success it might have achieved with different roster decisions is a debate without a clean resolution. Championship windows involve too many variables for any single factor to bear complete responsibility. The Bucks won a championship in 2021 with the Nasers on the roster. They also finished 32-50 and missed the playoffs in 2025-26 with the most accommodated roster construction in recent franchise memory. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and neither one settles the argument on its own. What is not subject to debate is the sequence of events and what it reveals. The Bucks spent years finding reasons to keep the Antetokounmpo brothers employed. They waived a 3-year NBA veteran to sign Alex to a 2-way deal in October 2025. They allowed a personal skills coach to travel on the team plane. They absorbed the coaching staff's frustrations and the public commentary about nepotism without changing anything fundamental about how they were operating. And then within 24 hours of Giannis being traded on June 22, 2026, both brothers were gone. Not after a transition period, not after a deliberate organizational evaluation, within a single day. That timeline is not an analyst's argument, it is a confession. The organization made a case for every critic would ever question the favoritism, and it made it faster and more clearly than any outside voice ever could. Giannis remains a free agent, his NBA future genuinely uncertain. He is well liked by everyone who played alongside him. And his leadership qualities are not manufactured. Teammates across multiple seasons consistently spoke about his value in the locker room and his daily competitive intensity. But the statistical reality of his career and his age make a return to a guaranteed NBA roster spot a difficult case to make to any front office evaluating him on basketball merit alone, without the organizational relationship that sustained his Milwaukee tenure. Reports suggest the Miami Heat evaluated him in free agency, but chose not to add him, reinforcing that the family accommodation was a Milwaukee-specific arrangement rather than something Giannis could simply transport to his new franchise. A return to European competition, where his 2021 championship ring and his professional reputation carry real weight independent of his brother's shadow, may represent the most realistic path to a productive next chapter. Coaching and player development remain long-term possibilities for someone with his locker room credibility and his first-hand understanding of what competing at the NBA level actually demands. Alex has a different timeline and a genuinely different challenge. He is younger, his game is still developing, and the Greek Basket League gives him something that his brief complicated time in Milwaukee never fully provided. Meaningful minutes in the featured role, an environment where his performance is the only thing being evaluated, and the freedom to build a professional identity that belongs entirely to him. Prometheus Patras has competed at the Euro Cup level and offers a legitimate platform for continued development. His story is not finished. It is, in a real sense, just starting. In a place where the Antetokounmpo name represents a legacy to honor rather than a standard to justify, and where the question of whether he deserves to be there will finally be answered by the only thing that should ever answer it: what he does on the court. What's your take on all of this? Do you think the Bucks were right to cut both brothers within 24 hours of the trade? Or did the speed of those moves expose exactly what critics have been arguing for years, that those spots were never really about basketball? And here's the bigger question underneath all of it. When a franchise hands out roster spots to keep a superstar happy, who is actually responsible? The player who asked, the brothers who accepted, or the organization that said yes every single time? Drop your answer in the comments below, because this is a conversation the NBA is going to keep having long after Milwaukee has moved on. Every franchise with a superstar faces some version of this same question about where accommodation ends and compromise begins. Milwaukee just gave us the most visible, the most documented, and the most personally complicated example of what happens when the superstar leaves and the organization finally gets to answer that question entirely on its own terms. Subscribe if you have not already, because the next chapter is here. What Milwaukee builds out of Taylor Jenkins, what Giannis builds in Miami, and whether Giannis and Alex carve out identities of their own away from his shadow are all worth watching closely.